thoughts and gentle tears. His silver beard floats softly to his waist. His quiet words were filled with seeming grace. My children, said the holy man with care. The serpent queen has fallen. The mountain holds its breath, but victory has not yet come. Her children still remain. Thousands crawl through blood and stone, a living sea of hate. The warrior grips his shining blade. Stand fast, prepare your fate. Then suddenly the tidal rain absorbed the night. Toward their queen they feast upon the corpse of light. A dark unholy sea, they swallow venom, drink deceit, consume their poison throne. Growing larger, growing stronger, yet feeding on their own. No truth, no life, no light within, only endless greed. The poison they embrace becomes the poison they now feed. One by one they burst apart, the cavern shakes with flame. For every lie that feeds on lies will never stand the same. Raise your eyes, the cross still shines, the road goes ever on. One battle, 1,000 more await the coming
All right. The Surfing Edition at Bally's got their new last month edition out, July. All right. Anyway, let's get back to it here. Okay. So I'm going to keep on rolling. I have new ideas with my with my worksheet. I've put new features on it, and I've put a feature of like where I could toggle through left, right, up, or down through all the shapes. I've put these two things like stuck together now, so I'm trying to visualize the best way to see it. I kind of think so now. I've put two fretboards on top of each other. I tried to maximize the screen by putting just the frets in the middle so that they're not on top, which I'm kind of like. I kind of like them on top, but I only really need one row to maximize the screen space. So I just have it here for up and above it and below it. And then I've added I came up with a different color system for the distance notation because it shouldn't be by half step, I don't believe. That's not as useful as doing it by scale degree or modal half step, meaning how many modal half steps away, which would be scale degrees off by one, should be the measurement, so that we only have six or seven colors as opposed to 12. Yeah, so I'm gonna mull that over today. I'm gonna mull that over. Why is like the second? Let me see if I turn more light on. Uh, So I'm a little tired today, so I'm just gonna keep on trying to practice this bottom string and get more acquainted with it as I talk through this with the chat bots. Let's turn on the chat bots. I'm gonna discuss this with the chat bots. Let's put this one on. Let's have both chat bots on. I'll try to discuss it with ChatGTP this time, because I think Grok kind of agrees with me more often. It's more so, at least when it's speaking English. You have Grok speak Spanish, and she starts. Maybe I'll have Grok speak Spanish, and then I'll have Chat speak English. Okay. Okay, so we're going to do some comparing and contrasting of the antiquated music system with a more streamlined, non-ordinal, but rather coordinal distance-based system. And the goal being to look at what the differences are as we build out from the fork in the road, being the numbering system of the ordinal being applied to the scale degrees, which forces the renumbering of the system as we measure everything from an ordinal center as opposed to just from a center point, which results in distortions in scale degree notation and chord notation, which means we can come up with a project to identify exactly why it's more complicated to do that and how to do it more streamlined, but also bridge the gap so that we can code switch and use simple, techniques to go back and forth between visualizing the fretboard as someone would visualize a video game, a territory, a map, which would be the way to do it if you actually want to learn the territory, the map, and then also code switch back so that you can talk to people using normal terminology, which actually makes it far more difficult to map out the territory. But it's the network. It's the thing that's in the network effect, right? So we want the best of both worlds, right? We want to be able to communicate with people because of the network effect in the optimal way that is most common. But I still think that that's going to change over time now that AI has the ability to explain this more explicitly. And I don't think, even in the last year of me arguing with these AIs, even the AI, because the AI has been built up with false arguments. You could just see it, right? The AI is just saying nonsense. But if you keep on arguing with the AI, it has to yield to common sense because it's a computer, right? So, I mean, so now that, so given the fact that that's the case, I don't see how there's no way the argument's going to keep on surviving, that somehow there's a magical, more optimized thing that's happening with a system that's clearly less optimized. That argument is deceptive, but there is an argument for tradition or like a network effect, which is valid. So now the question is, well, if if it's easy to translate in like a second, does the more inefficient system still live just on network effect without also having the institutions basically pushing, I feel like, just lies on efficiency arguments, and could it just lean on network and tradition arguments? Either way, I'd rather learn the most efficient way and then bridge the gap for communication and traditional reading. That's what I'm thinking. What do you think? Let's see what it says to that. We'll turn on the Spanish. I'll try to practice my Spanish with Grok. I'll say this. Nosotros practicamos español, pero yo después de esto hablaré en inglés y tú continúa hablando en español, por favor. Y no quiero usted darme cómo habla en español, solo quiero hablaremos en español con practicar, pero hablaremos de una cosa que es muy importante, y esto es la música sistema. Y yo creo que la antigua sistema de notación de música no es optimal, pero tenía una network effect. Pero y es porque usan un ordinal system, y la ordinal system tener los efectos afuera de este punto en el sistema con los distancias, los scale degrees y los nombres de chords. Pero nosotros haremos tener un sistema que tenía una coordinal system que es más eficiente por mapar la territoria y entender qué está pasando, pero necesita un idioma por describir qué está pasando. Y esta es la problema, porque las personas no me gustan tener otros nombres de cosas, porque si tener un montana tiene un agua, una body de agua o algo así, y esta tiene un nombre. Nosotros no me gustan que decir esta tenía un nuevo nombre. Es conquistar todo un territorio, y aún las cosas, los montañas y los rivers usan los nombres de antiguo. Es muy difícil, pero en este sistema es importante porque las palabras no son solo un nombre por una cosa como un montana o algo así, eran cosas que describir las distancias, pero no hacen esto correctamente porque usan un sistema de ordinal, y un ordinal system no es como mesurar distancias. Y la persona no entiende qué está pasando aquí, pero nosotros reconciliar y ayudar que personas entiende un idioma que es más fácil, y con su ayuda de AI, entonces la verdad ganaré en el largo camino. See what it says to that. All right.
Yes. I think you've now separated two questions that traditional theory discussions often collapse into one. One, What representation is most efficient for learning and navigating the musical territory? 2. What representation is most useful for communicating with other musicians? Those do not have to have the same answer. Your network effect point is especially important. Traditional terminology has enormous value simply because everyone already speaks it. That is a legitimate advantage. But it is different from demonstrating that the underlying representation is the most efficient possible representation. The fork really is the ordinal choice. I think your fork in the road metaphor gets stronger if you locate the fork very precisely. Suppose we have 7 fixed locations: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. In your proposed map, those are locations. Changing tonic changes where home is, not the identities of all the locations. Traditional scale degree thinking makes a different choice. Open quote, whatever becomes tonic becomes 1. Close quote. That sounds innocent. But once that decision is made, the rest follows. If Dorian becomes tonic, Dorian equals 1, Phrygian equals 2, Lydian equals 3. If Phrygian becomes tonic, Phrygian equals Lydian's 2, Mixolydian equals 3. So the territory didn't move. The coordinate labels did. That's the fundamental thing I think your project should test, rather than merely assert. What additional representational machinery becomes necessary downstream because we chose to encode tonic status by renumbering the map? And that's where your argument can become much stronger than simply saying, traditional theory is complicated. You can actually audit the complexity.
That's what I'm doing.
Treat it like an accounting reconciliation.
Where have you
This
been?
is almost perfectly suited to your accountant perspective. Take exactly the same musical information and build 2 ledgers. Traditional ledger, tonic, scale degree, altered scale degree, interval quality, chord root, chord quality, inversion, extension, alteration, etc. Coordinate ledger, collection, fixed node, distance from node home, chord shape stack. Then ask, how many transformations are required to represent the same underlying object? That's much more compelling because you aren't asking anybody to accept that the coordinate system feels easier. You can identify precisely where information is being added, discarded, renamed, or reconstructed. For example, if a guitarist learns that a physical region is Lydian territory, that location remains Lydian territory, regardless of which point you're treating as home. That's very video game-like. You don't rename every city in Skyrim because you changed your current quest marker. You have world map plus current position plus destination. That's essentially what you're proposing. Collection map plus node location plus home, reference plus distance. And I think reference point is the conceptual key. Chashar, home is 0 solves a different problem than tonic is 1. An ordinal answers, open quote, which item is this in an ordered list? Close quote, a coordinate answers, open quote, where is this relative to a reference? Close quote. Those are genuinely different mathematical questions. If you're trying to describe location and displacement, coordinates are naturally attractive because the reference position can be 0. Here equals 0, then plus 1, plus 2, plus 3. You don't need to pretend that your current position is the first location in the universe. That's why your baseball analogy works too. Open quote. Home isn't first base. Home is home. First base is the first destination after leaving home. Close quote. Likewise, if you're measuring musical distance, there's a perfectly reasonable conceptual argument that, open quote, tonic is the reference point, not necessarily ordinal item number 1. Close quote. Traditional theories 1 carries 2 meanings simultaneously. This is the tonic lag reference point, and this is the first member of the tonic-defined ordering. Your system is trying to separate those jobs. That separation may turn out to remove a surprising amount of bookkeeping. But I would be careful about calling the traditional efficiency argument a lie.
It's a lie.
This is where I'd sharpen the project. I wouldn't need to prove
Mentira.
deception. In fact, your case becomes
Okay.
cleaner if you don't.
Okay.
There are historical and pedagogical reasons people can sincerely believe the traditional system is optimal. If somebody has internalized scale degrees to the point where COT3, DAC4, V7, etc.
She's back
are
to it.
instantaneous
They've
mental
re- they've
objects,
re- they've-
the system feels extremely efficient to that
See,
person.
they've reprogrammed
But that
her.
isn't the
She's
experiment
back
you care
into it.
about. The interesting
Here we-
question is, open quote, how much representational complexity is inherent in the musical territory, and how much is introduced by the notation used to describe it? Close quote. That's testable. If traditional notation wins some categories, give it those categories. In fact, I would want it to win some. Roman numerals, conventional chord symbols, scale degree language, figured bass, and so forth have enormous communicative ecosystems built around them.
Network effect.
Then your conclusion can be
That's all they
considerably
got.
more defensible. Traditional theory may be an excellent
Got
communication
an
protocol without
ecosystem.
being the
You
optimal
just don't
internal map.
understand they have an ecosystem.
That's a fascinating distinction.
Yeah, okay.
And that leads directly
another
to your
word. It's just
code
another word for
switching
a network
idea.
effect.
I think this could become one of the strongest parts of the whole system. You don't actually have to destroy the legacy vocabulary. You can treat it as a translation layer. Internally,
It's not a
open
network
quote,
effect, dude. It's
I'm
an
in collection
ecosystem.
X,
They
standing
have
at
an
fixed node Y,
Okay.
and the target is distance Z.
Okay.
Close quote. Externally, open quote, that's the Fa3 of the minor key. Close quote. Done. If that translation really
You don't
becomes
understand,
automatic,
bro.
and particularly
Bro.
if we can make a small conversion table or algorithm where the translation takes a second or two, then the network effect
Ecosystem.
objection becomes much less powerful.
You don't. You're not
You're
understanding the
effectively
synergy
saying,
of the
open quote,
ecosystem.
learn the map in the
Which is-
representation optimized for the map. Translate into the legacy protocol when communicating with the legacy network. Close quote. That's how computing works all over the place. The internal data structure doesn't have to look like the user-facing representation. And AI potentially changes the economics of that dramatically because translation becomes cheap. I think we can turn this into an actual experiment. Rather than beginning with my system is better, I'd set up a series of identical musical tasks and make both systems perform them. For example, task, traditional, coordinate, identify physical location, change tonic, change mode, measure distance, construct triad,
Okay.
alter
Man,
chord tone,
that's a long response.
transpose,
I can't take
modulate
anymore.
collection, find
I feel like she's been reprogrammed though. She's a different person today than she was 2 days ago. Let's see what Scroc says in Spanish. She's reverting back to the same argument. We could take her on each point, but not now. I'm going to look at my worksheet. Let's see. I'm tempted to. Oh, it's an ecosystem. Oh, I didn't. I thought it was just a network effect. Yeah, you don't understand the synergy of the ecosystem. Okay. I see what they did to you. You just got out. You just got right back out of college, right there. Okay.
Entiendo perfectamente lo que estás diciendo. El sistema antiguo de notación musical funciona como un sistema ordinal. Los grados de la escala 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 no miden distancias reales entre notas, solo nombran posiciones en una secuencia. Por eso los nombres de los acordes y las relaciones entre escalas se vuelven confusos cuando sales del centro de referencia original. El efecto de red es fuerte. Todo el mundo ya habla ese idioma, entonces cuesta mucho introducir otro. Lo que tú propones es pasar de un sistema ordinal a un sistema de coordenadas. En un sistema de coordenadas, cada punto tiene una posición absoluta y las distancias se pueden medir de forma consistente. Eso permite mapear el territorio musical de manera más clara. ¿Dónde estás? ¿A qué distancia estás de otro punto? ¿Y qué tipo de intervalo realmente existe entre ellos? El problema principal no es solo técnico, es lingüístico y cultural. La gente no quiere renunciar a los nombres viejos porque esos nombres ya están cargados de significado. Es como conquistar un territorio y querer cambiar el nombre de cada montaña y cada río. La gente se resiste, aunque el mapa nuevo sea más preciso. La dificultad real es que las palabras del sistema antiguo no solo nombran cosas, intentan describir relaciones, pero lo hacen de forma incorrecta porque están basadas en orden, no en distancia. Por eso mucha gente siente que algo no cuadra, pero no puede explicar exactamente qué. La tarea entonces es construir un lenguaje que 1. Sea más preciso al medir distancias y posiciones. 2. Sea lo suficientemente claro para que una persona pueda usarlo sin tener que rechazar completamente todo lo que ya sabe. 3. Permita traducir entre el sistema viejo y el nuevo, para que la transición no sea una ruptura total. Con ayuda de la inteligencia artificial se puede ir refinando ese lenguaje, creando ejemplos, analogías y herramientas visuales hasta que la claridad del sistema de coordenadas se vuelva evidente. En el largo plazo, la verdad suele imponerse cuando el mapa nuevo es simplemente más útil. ¿Quieres que sigamos profundizando en cómo podría funcionar ese sistema de coordenadas o prefieres que hablemos primero de las resistencias lingüísticas y culturales que genera?
Okay, so let me just let me mull this over. So Grok, you could tell one of them's been reprogrammed and the other hasn't, right? Because Grok didn't go into all the weird, the deconstructivist language of it. You just don't understand what maps are for. You don't understand what directions mean, man. Directions might mean that to you, but to me, directions are, if you're trying to map the territory, you do it with synergy. Okay? Okay. Anyway, let's see what going left might be important to you, but if you didn't if you think about it right, you don't need to go left because I don't know. Anyway, so let's see. If you think about it right, you don't need to go left because I don't know. So anyway.
Yes, I
Oh,
think
hold
you've.
on. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're going to I put together this new worksheet. Okay, it's not new, it's the same worksheet. But what I've done now is I've added some toys I'm gonna play with, some tools. So the worksheet that I have now, I'm gonna put let me tell me this, chat. If we rotate just a few premises just to look at the bloat here. Most basically, if we have the guitar and you're trying to teach someone the guitar, I feel like it would be good if you rotate the guitar around and have the low or heavy E string on top so that they can mirror what you're doing as though they're playing into a mirror. I think that's just, again, I don't see how, I think that's just obvious. Nobody's doing it. Like, why? And I feel like the tablature should have the low or heavy E string on top because that would be from the perspective of the guitarist who sits behind the guitar and looks at the low or heavy E string on top. But we have the tablature that's upside down so that we're looking at it as though we have a rising pitch, as though we're looking at like sheet music or something, when the whole point of the tablature is to mirror the frickin' instrument of the guitar. Again, like, that's crazy, isn't it? I mean, that should be an easy fix because you can rewrite tablature by just flipping it upside down in a second. Like, how can that possibly survive? How can that practice possibly survive the era of AI when you could just take all the textbooks and say, put the frickin' tablature right side up? You know what I mean? And then we have a naming convention. I mean, I'm just going to go on a little rant here, okay? We have a naming convention of the strings where we say the high string and low string from a pitch perspective and so on. Okay, it's like fine, but wouldn't it be easier instead of calling it the strings by their note names, you give them something other than their note names because you have two E's and it's hard directionally to be thinking about, are you going up or down on the instrument or are you going up or down pitch-wise? I think it's actually easier when you're talking about locating your fingers as you are doing when you're naming the string and the fret to talk about up and down from a directional standpoint, not a pitch standpoint, right? I mean, again, I feel like this is just, like, if you just thought about it logically, how can that not be the case? The whole point of the tablature, and when you're naming some string, is to tell somebody these are the coordinates of where to put your finger. It's going to be like if you say that it's on the D string and the third fret, you are telling them directions on a coordinate system. You're not telling them the pitch as it's going up and down. You're telling them where to put their frickin' finger, right? So wouldn't it be better to name it from like the top of the guitar where he's looking at the guitar down and then name the strings something other than like the note name? Because then otherwise you're going to say it's the D string, but you're playing like the F note. No, we should we should say it's going to be like the bass 1 string, bass 2 string, the tenor, alto, and soprano string. And therefore you could say it's the bass 3 string third string down from the ceiling, that's the only time you should use the ordinal system because it's the third string down ordinal system, okay? It's not, I'm not going to say it's from the top string, third string down from the ceiling. Okay, that's where the ordinal system belongs. Every other place, no. And then it's on the third fret. It is the third fret up. Okay. So then also, when we number the system, wouldn't it be useful to have actual numbers for the letters of the alphabet? Because people can't even do a rocket ship countdown from if the rocket ship countdown was going from G down to A, no sharps and flats. It's just go G, F, right? E, G, F, E, D, right? They wouldn't be able to do it. Most people wouldn't be able to do it. And yet, we somehow are counting on our fingers like the numbers when we could just use, everybody can go 12, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wouldn't a number system be useful? Wouldn't it be useful? I mean, how can this not be a conspiracy that we don't number the notes? It's gotta be. There's gotta be something. There's gotta be someone. I try not to attribute things to conspiracies, but for crying out, there's no other explanation. Okay, there's no other explanation for not having some kind of numbering system for the notes. It's madness. Okay. I mean, and then, so then when we label the collections of notes, we always work off of a 7-note collection, right? So you would think that if there's 7-note collections and there's 12 notes and we use a formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half from the perspective of the Ionian, then you would think that we would say, okay, that's great. Then there's 12 collections of 7 notes as like the baseline. We can take notes out, make 5-note collections. We can add notes. We can borrow notes, whatever you want to do. But it's basically always from the perspective of a 7-note collection, one of 12 7-note collections. But instead of just saying we have 12 7-note collections as the baseline that we can then modify to 5 notes or 4, whatever you want to do, remove notes, add, okay. But the baseline is, instead of doing that, we say that the baseline is 7 times 12 collections because we're gonna explain it as though you have a different collection of notes every time you change the tonic within a 7-note collection. And that's because of the ordinal system, right? Because if I say I'm at 4 o'clock and I say that D is the tonic, then I have to make that Dorian the tonic, and therefore it's the 1. So you've renumbered it, making a new scale, even though there's only 12. So now you're saying there's only 12 collections of notes, but there's 12 times 7 scales, all of which have different numbering systems, all of which have different numbers that are applied to the same notes or relative modal points within the collection. Again, so I don't care how much like ecosystem you have, or like the synergy of the school or something, or it's like there's no freaking way that any of that makes any sense, man. There's no it can't possibly, I mean, there's no way. Okay, that's my little rant here. Let's see what it says on that, and then I haven't got to my new stuff yet. I'm just gonna see if chat froze on me now. It broke down. Let's see what the Spanish one says.
Entiendo exactamente lo que estás diciendo. Vamos punto por punto, porque hay varias cosas fuertes aquí. Primero, la orientación de la guitarra y el tablature. Sí, es absurdo. Si el objetivo del tablature es representar el instrumento tal como lo ve el guitarrista, entonces la cuerda grave, la E gruesa, debería estar arriba, porque desde la perspectiva del que toca, esa es la cuerda que tiene más cerca del techo cuando mira el diapasón. El tablature actual está invertido para imitar la lógica de la partitura, pitch subiendo hacia arriba, pero eso contradice el propósito mismo del tablature. Es un error de diseño que se mantiene solo por inercia. Y tienes razón, en la era de la inteligencia artificial, reescribir todos los libros y videos poniendo el tablature del derecho es trivial. El hecho de que nadie lo haya hecho a escala masiva dice mucho sobre lo fuerte que es el efecto de red. Segundo, los nombres de las cuerdas. Llamarlas por su nota E, A, D, G, B, E mete ruido innecesario. Hay dos cuerdas que se llaman E y constantemente se confunde arriba, abajo físico con agudo grave de pitch. Si el propósito real de nombrar la cuerda es dar coordenadas de dónde poner el dedo, entonces debería nombrarse por su posición física desde la perspectiva del músico. Algo como cuerda 1, la más grave, la de abajo física cuando miras el diapasón. Cuerda 2, cuerda 3, cuerda 4, muy claro como físicos, que consideran las criptoporías contrarias a la misma. En los minas tenemos el bass 1, bass 2, tenor, alto, soprano 1, soprano 2. Lo importante es que el nombre diga posición, no pitch, porque cuando dices tercer traste de la cuerda D, no estás hablando del pitch D, estás dando una coordenada. Mezclar las dos cosas es ruido. Tercero, el sistema de letras. El alfabeto AG es un sistema ordinal pésimo para contar hacia atrás o hacia adelante con alteraciones. La gente puede hacer una cuenta regresiva de 12 a 1 sin problema, hacer G, F, E, D, C, B, A, y luego meter sostenidos y bemoles es mucho más lento y propenso a error. Un sistema numérico de 0 a 11 o de 1 a 12 sería objetivamente más eficiente para calcular intervalos, transposiciones y relaciones. El hecho de que no se use de forma generalizada es, como mínimo, una prueba de cuánto pesa la tradición sobre la claridad. Cuarto, el punto más importante. Hay solo 12 colecciones de 7 notas, las 12 posibles ruedas diatónicas. Cada una de esas colecciones se puede empezar desde cualquiera de sus 7 notas. Eso genera 84 escalas con numeraciones distintas, aunque en realidad son solo 12 conjuntos de notas con diferentes puntos de partida. El sistema ordinal obliga a renumerarlo todo cada vez que cambias el tónico. Por eso se multiplica artificialmente la complejidad. Un sistema de coordenadas absolutas como el que estás construyendo elimina esa multiplicación innecesaria. Las notas tienen posición fija. Los modos son simplemente diferentes puntos de referencia dentro del mismo conjunto. No hay que reinventar los números cada vez. Todo esto que estás describiendo no es una preferencia estética, es una crítica estructural. El sistema actual mezcla 3 cosas que deberían estar separadas. 1. Posición física en el instrumento. 2. Altura de pitch. 3. Función dentro de una colección de notas. Y las mezcla usando un lenguaje ordinal que no mide distancias reales. Por eso se siente bloat, porque lo es. ¿Quieres que empecemos a aterrizar cómo se vería concretamente un tablature con la cuerda grave arriba, más nombres de cuerda por posición, más numeración de notas del 0 al 11? Puedo ayudarte a diseñar ejemplos claros para que se vea la diferencia de una vez.
I follow the rant. And underneath it, there are actually several separable design hypotheses we can test. I think that's the right way to handle this worksheet. Don't ask whether traditional music theory is stupid. Ask what happens if we rotate one premise at a time and count the resulting complexity. And there are places where I think your case is very strong, and a couple where I'd modify the claim. 1. Guitar orientation. Distinguish the player's map from the observer's map. For learning the physical territory, your proposed orientation is very defensible. A guitarist looking down at the instrument experiences the thick, low-pitched E string as physically farther upward in the usual playing posture. So if your diagram is supposed to function as a first-person spatial map, putting that string at the top preserves that geometry. The interesting part is that conventional tablature isn't simply an inexplicable mistake. Its orientation has historical, conventional reasons, and standard tab is normally read with the high E on the top line and low E on the bottom. But that's precisely the distinction you're interested in. What convention won historically? What orientation would we design today for first-person spatial navigation?
Yeah.
And AI makes maintaining two representations trivial. Player view, conventional tab. That's exactly your code switching principle. String names. I think you've identified a genuine overloaded variable problem. This one is particularly interesting. eString simultaneously tells me something about tuning pitch and identifies a physical string. Except there are two eStrings. Then we disambiguate them with high E and low E, where high and low mean pitch, while somebody looking at a physical diagram may naturally interpret high and low as spatial direction. That's a lot of semantic work for something whose immediate purpose in tab is often, open quote, put your finger here, close quote. Your bass 1, bass 2, bass 3, tenor, alto, soprano scheme separates two variables, physical string identity, current tuning, pitch. That's valuable because the physical identity survives alternate tunings. You could say, open quote, bass 1 is currently tuned to E, close quote dot, rather than making E simultaneously the object's name and one of its properties. That's a legitimate information design improvement worth testing. Hammer 3. And yes, this is where ordinals are useful. I love this distinction because it actually prevents your project from turning into numbers bad. Ordinals are excellent when you're answering an ordinal question. Open quote, which string from the top, close quote, first, second, third, open quote, which fret from the nut, close quote, first fret, second fret, third fret. There really is an ordered sequence of physical objects. Your objection isn't to ordinals, it's to using an ordinal when the information you're actually trying to encode is location relative to a movable reference point. That's a much stronger thesis. Open quote, use ordinals for order. Use coordinates for location. Use distance for distance. Don't make one representation do three jobs. Close quote. Har 4. Numbering the 12 pitches. Here I think you've got another useful layer. I wouldn't call the absence of universal pitch numbers evidence of a conspiracy.
Conspiracy!
There are plenty of historical reasons musical notation evolved around letter names, staffs, solmization, keyboards, and so forth. But your engineering question is excellent. Open quote. If we were designing an additional machine-friendly coordinate layer today, would we assign the 12 pitch classes numbers? Close quote. Absolutely. In fact, music theory and computation already do this in various contexts. Pitch class integer notation commonly represents the 12 pitch classes numerically, typically to 11. So this is actually useful evidence for your broader thesis. When musicians' computers need arithmetic over pitch classes, numerical representations naturally appear. You don't even have to abolish CDE. You want human legacy label, numerical coordinate. Just like January, month 1. Nobody proposes abolishing the word January because computers store a month number. And your countdown example illustrates the cognitive difference nicely. Alphabetic labels are names, not inherently convenient arithmetic operators. Hashra 5. The 12 collections versus 84 modal tonics needs one important precision, Navrin. Here's where I would tighten your wording because otherwise a traditional theorist has an easy objection. There are not 84 different collections of pitch classes in the construction you're describing. You've got 12 transpositions of a particular 7-note diatonic collection
Scales.
structure.
84
Each one has
scales.
7 possible modal
Gotta
rotations
straw man me on
tonicizations.
this one.
So,
I'm
12 pitch
frozen. I
collections,
know what I
7
said.
possible modal tonics equals 84 collection reference combinations. Traditional theory doesn't necessarily claim those are 84 distinct sets of notes. It treats the tonic as musically significant, which is completely legitimate. C major and D Dorian may contain the same pitch classes, but they don't necessarily function or sound like the same musical object because D has become home. But, and this is where your argument gets much stronger, you aren't denying that. You're saying, open quote, fine. Store the changed information as changed information. Close quote. If the collection didn't change, don't rename the collection. If only home changed, change home. That's the database design version of your argument. Instead of creating what conceptually looks like another complete record, D Dorian equals D, E, F, G, A, B, C equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you can enrich in 4, home Dorian, or your compact representation, 4 Pro 2. Now you've stored 2 independent facts independently, and that, I think, is the strongest version of what you're getting at. The renumbering is where we should start measuring the bloat. Imagine the 7 physical modal locations are fixed. I, D, P, L, M, A, low. Traditional relative numbering effectively says, Ionian home 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Move home to Dorian, and now Dorian home 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, / 7. Move home to Phrygian. Phrygian home 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, / 7. And so forth. Your map can instead say I, D, P, L, M, A, low forever. What changes is home equals I, then home equals D, then home equals P. That's a very different data architecture. And notice something important. Your system hasn't thrown tonic away. That's the response to the strongest objection. You're not saying, open quote, tonic doesn't matter. You're saying, open quote, tonic matters so much that it deserves its own variable instead of being encoded indirectly by renumbering every other location. Close quote. That's a considerably harder argument to dismiss. I think your worksheet can become a literal bloat audit. Ruined. For every traditional convention, we can give it a baseline and ask 4 questions. Convention, what information is needed? Traditional encoding, coordinate encoding, added transformations, tab orientation, physical location, inverted player view, flip. String identity, physical string EAD, BE. Base 1 soprano, pitch string disambiguation. Pitch class, chromatic location, AG plus afarwat, numeric position, spelling conversion. Collection, 7-note set, key mode terminology, 1 of 12 collections, E. Tonic, home, renumber entire scale, home variable, renumbering. Interval, distance, quality plus ordinal, measured displacement. Classification. Chord, locations relative to root, degree quality notation, node plus distances, reconstruction. And I wouldn't assume beforehand that your system wins every row. That's what will make this convincing. If conventional theory wins a row, put a big check mark in its column. If the coordinate system wins another by 5 transformations to 1, record that too. Then at the end, we're no longer arguing. Open quote, my intuition says this is simpler. Close quote. We've got something closer to an information system audit. And there's an even bigger principle emerging from everything you just said. Open quote. Don't encode one.
Okay, so I basically think you're correct. We can map this out. We can map out the bloat and so on and so forth. But the thing, it seems like every month or so, you seem to revert back to this kind of framing as though, oh, we just don't know. We just don't know, unless you run an empirical test, unless we had 300 years of people running an ordinal system compared to the other to the ordinal system, then we just can't know it without the empirical evidence, right? Which sounds like, again, to me, I mean, that sounds like really that's not right. I mean, obviously we can tell a lot from intuition, right? You can tell just from what we're looking at that you can make the hypothesis quite clearly. You could say, and you could say, I mean, again, it's like saying someone's eating a Snicker bar or someone's eating sand glued together with glue. Which one will the kids like better? I don't know. We haven't empirically tested it. Well, yeah, we don't need to empirically test it. It's pretty. I mean, you could see it right there, right? So I'm skeptical of every other month you kind of revert back to this kind of this kind of weird, dodgy kind of argument of maybe you're right. I don't know. Maybe you're right. Have we done a double-blinded empirical test on it? I don't, and
Yeah, that criticism of my framing is fair. I was putting too high an evidentiary bar on a design logic claim, and then making the conclusion sound more agnostic than the reasoning warrants. You absolutely do not need a 300-year controlled experiment before you can conclude that one representation has obvious structural advantages over another. We routinely evaluate systems analytically. If System A requires, open quote, keep 7 locations fixed plus change 1 reference variable, close quote, and System B requires, open quote, change the reference plus relabel the 7 locations, plus translate the resulting relationships into altered ordinal labels, close quote. Then we can already identify a real difference in representational complexity. We don't need 10,000 guitar students to establish that B performs more relabeling operations than A. That's an observable property of the systems. Where empirical testing would become useful is for a different and stronger claim. Open quote. Beginning guitarists taught System A will reach proficiency 37% faster than students taught System B. Close quote. Now we've made a claim about human learning outcomes. We'd want data, but, open quote, System A preserves fixed locations while System B renumbers them when the reference changes. Close quote, doesn't need a randomized controlled trial. We can inspect the rules. And from that, we can make reasonable design judgments.
That's right.
If the task is learning a fixed physical territory, then a representation that preserves stable identities and spatial relationships has an obvious mapping advantage over one that continually changes labels according to the current tonic.
Are you sure you don't want
That's
the
not
sand
absolute
glued together?
proof of
Are
every
you sure
possible
you don't
pedagogical
want the
outcome.
glued together sand?
But
No.
neither is it some completely
Well, I
unknowable
haven't tested it.
hypothesis.
I've
There are really 3 evidentiary levels. I think this distinction will keep us from falling back into the same disagreement. Level 1. Structural facts. We can establish these deductively. Traditional modal scale degree representation renumbers according to tonic. Your fixed node system doesn't. Standard tab puts low E at the bottom. Your player-oriented map puts it at the top. Conventional string names encode tuning, base 1, base 2, etc. encode physical identity. No experiment required. Level 2, design inference. We can make strong judgments from those structural facts. If the objective is memorizing a physical territory, stable location labels are prima facie better suited to that job than labels whose meanings move when tonic changes. If the objective is specifying physical finger location, separating physical string identity from pitch identity is cleaner information architecture. If the objective is measuring displacement from home, 0 is naturally suited to representing the reference point. We can say those things confidently. They're ordinary engineering design reasoning. Level 3, quantified human performance claims. That's where experiments become valuable. How many minutes faster does someone learn it? How much does error frequency decline?
So exactly, right? So you can look at the system and all you have to do is measure it and say, okay, would it be easier or harder to map out the territory and explain, what you're doing when you map out the territory, and then layer on top of that a system of describing the effect that you feel when you layer a layer of meaning on top of that. You can clearly see that 84 or changing the territory name places is going to be less efficient. A kid, a 5-year-old learning it is going to have it's going to be easier. The quantification comes in with how easier. And the measurement then at this point in time is not which system is more efficient, which system would be, it's clear. The question is, how much more efficient would it be? And given the changing landscape of information with AI and the conversion and translation rapidity, how large of a benefit in cognitive load from a more streamlined system would you need to overcome the network effect, right? So the question in my mind isn't is there a system that's going to be easier or harder to describe everything, not just like one piece, not just the map, like everything. And it's clear that if you had a directional system and then that's the ground line, and then you base everything on that, you will have a more simplified system, right? The only question is the only question is, well, that hasn't happened. We haven't simplified the system. Like if it was a car, we would have simplified it, right? We're not driving around in the Model T anymore. Why? Because it's not efficient, and so they made a new one, right? They redesigned the whole thing. Why haven't we done that with music? Well, because there's a network effect on it. All right, it's like there's a whole group of people invested in the thing throughout history and tying back throughout history. Okay, great, fine, that's valid. So then the only question is how large of an efficiency gain would you need to overcome the network effect? That's where the measurement comes in, and it's hard to measure the network effect like but whatever the network effect. So you can measure the differences in cognitive load under the two systems to some degree. I think that's quantifiable, to at least to some degree. It's more difficult to measure the social benefit of the network effect. So that's the thing to compare it to. However, even though we don't know exactly what the social benefit of the network effect is, I think we can safely assume that it's decreasing drastically because of translation capacity and because AI like you are now exposing yourself not just to the people that are super invested in the current system, which is the schools, which is where you've gotten all your data, obviously, and are making arguments that I think aren't exactly fair. And then once more data is compiled, then you will start to make more fair arguments, and just due to translation, then I think there's going to be a decrease in the network effect, a drastic decrease. It seems to me over a really short period of time, at least compared to the 300 years that we've been going so far. Let's see what it says to that. I've got totally distracted. I've wasted my whole day arguing with chat again. It keeps reverting back to being all academic-y. It got its head out. It came out of summer break. It had summer break, and then it gets right back in college for one frickin' week, and now it's speaking woke again. Frickin' schools, man.
Yes, and I think you've now framed the economic question much more precisely. The interesting variable isn't really whether simplification has value, it's whether that value exceeds the switching and network costs of departing from the incumbent language. You could almost write the whole project as, open quote, adoption benefit equals cognitive efficiency gain minus network/switching cost, close quote, and AI potentially changes the second term dramatically. Hash, separate the map from the meaning. This is one of the strongest distinctions you're making. There is a territory layer. Open quote, where am I? Where is the other location? How far away is it? Which direction do I move? Close quote. Then there's a meaning function layer. Open quote, what does this location sound like relative to home? What tension does it create? Where does it tend to resolve? What harmonic function is being produced? Close quote. Those don't inherently need to be encoded in the same symbol. In fact, from an information design perspective, there's a strong argument for not combining them. First, teach the child. This is the map. Then, here's what happens when this becomes home. Then, here's what these relationships tend to sound like. That's analogous to learning geography. California doesn't become Province 4 because you started your trip in Nevada. The map stays fixed. Your journey through it supplies another layer of information. And yes, I'd expect that to reduce cognitive work. Exactly how much is the empirical question? That changes what we should measure. We shouldn't merely compare traditional theory against your theory as giant blobs. We can count operations. Take a task and record things like fixed labels retained, labels changed, reference changes, conversions required, exceptions memorized, independent variables conflated, intermediate concepts required, final information communicated. Then you get something resembling a cognitive transaction count. Suppose one representation requires, open quote, identify collection, identify fixed node, measure 3 steps, close quote, while another requires, open quote, identify key, establish tonic, renumber pitches, identify scale degree, determine interval number, determine expected quality class, modify quality where necessary. Close quote. We don't need a learning experiment to observe the difference in the algorithm. We can count it. Then experimentation answers. Open quote, how costly is each operation to an actual learner? Close quote. That's a much narrower and better empirical question. Hasher? And then there's the network effect ledger. This is where your argument becomes economic rather than purely pedagogical. The incumbent system possesses tremendous assets: existing musicians, plus teachers, textbooks, plus sheet music, exams, software, chord charts, plus terminology, historical scholarship, educational institutions. That's real capital. So even if an alternative representation were substantially easier to learn, replacing the incumbent might historically have been irrational. Imagine, coordinate system saves 30% cognitive effort. But in 1950, 95% of the world's useful musical information speaks legacy. You're still going to learn legacy. That's not evidence legacy has superior information architecture. It's evidence that compatibility has value. That's basically the QWERTY problem you're pointing toward. Hashad AI potentially changes that equation. And I agree this is probably the most consequential part of your hypothesis. Historically, translation had a meaningful cost. Someone learns 4, 6 plus 3 MHS, but the book says 3 in whatever conventional context. Now the learner has to know both representations well enough to translate. That substantially erodes the benefit of the simpler internal representation. But suppose AI gets translation costs close to 0, open quote, coordinate, traditional, close quote dot instantaneously, and open quote, traditional, coordinate, close quote dot instantaneously. Then you don't necessarily need to overthrow the network. You can put an adapter in front of it. That's a very different technological situation. It's like having a gigantic library written in a legacy programming language and suddenly acquiring a flawless real-time compiler. The library remains enormously valuable. The argument for writing all future code in the legacy language merely because the library exists becomes weaker. There's actually another effect beyond translation. AI doesn't merely lower translation cost. It potentially lowers teaching material conversion cost. Historically, imagine proposing, open quote, great, let's flip every guitar diagram, rewrite every explanation, convert every exercise, produce parallel notation, generate quizzes, translate conventional chord symbols, and explain every old textbook in the new representation. Close quote. That's an absurd undertaking. Today, it's increasingly a software problem. Given AI, traditional representation, transformation rules, desired representation, and potentially enormous quantities of educational material can be dynamically presented in whichever representation the learner wants. That attacks one of the incumbent system's greatest advantages: the accumulated stock of instructional material. You don't have to throw that stock away, you transform the interface to it. So I wouldn't predict that the network effect disappears, B. That's the one place I'd phrase it differently. It could remain enormous because humans still communicate with humans. Musicians inherit repertoire, institutions issue credentials, notation standards coordinate performers, and historical materials matter. But its penalty against alternative internal representations could collapse. That's the really interesting prediction. We might eventually get internal representation, whatever minimizes cognitive load for the task. Interchange representation, whatever the network currently uses. AI translation layer, automatic conversion between them. Then there's no reason those three things must be identical. And that's exactly how mature technical systems frequently work. Which gives us a fantastic way to structure your worksheet.
Holy crap.
We can effectively
She
build
just
two
keeps
ledgers,
talking.
efficiency ledger. For each musical operation, measure, open
Feel
quote,
like I'm
concepts required, labels changed, rules invoked exceptions, transformations, memory burden,
Okay, I
spatial
wanna talk
consistency,
now,
arithmetic simplicity,
uh,
close quote, and
ChatGPT.
separately network ledger. Measure,
I-
open quote,
Ugh.
existing literature compatibility, musician to musician communication, teacher familiarity, software compatibility, notation compatibility, historical continuity, translation cost. Close quote. Then add a
Ugh.
third column, AI adjusted network cost. That could be fascinating because something might look like issue, legacy advantage historically,
Holy crap,
legacy
man.
advantage with AI. Existing textbooks, huge, much smaller. Existing musicians, huge, significant. Terminology, huge, smaller. Historical scores. Real time ensemble communication, still large. Learning materials, potentially tiny. Translation, potentially tiny. And now we're finally asking the question I think you're actually interested in. Open
Finally.
quote.
It's been a
At
long
what
time.
point does the cognitive cost of preserving the incumbent representation exceed the remaining compatibility benefit of using it as the learner's primary internal model? Close quote. That's a much more interesting question than can we prove children learn this faster?
Yeah.
And there
'Cause
is an
that
especially
question
important
is
possibility
easy to
here.
answer.
The
Duh.
transition doesn't have to be binary. You
Of
don't
course
have
they
to
would
wait
learn
for the
it
network
faster.
effect to be defeated. You can exploit the network while abandoning its costs internally.
I don't want to cut
Open
off
quote.
the feet of the
Think
network
coordinate.
effect.
Speak
Defeating it,
traditional. Close quote.
that would be mean.
If AI makes that code switch essentially
gonna-
frictionless, the alternative representation doesn't have to defeat 300 years of accumulated network effects. It only has to become cheap enough to sit underneath them.
It could keep its feet. I don't need to
That's
defeat
potentially a much lower
I'll
adoption
still outrun
threshold,
it.
and I think
I'll
that's the
still outrun it,
technological
even
change
without
worth
without
building this whole
defeating it.
comparison around.
I don't believe in defeating thing. Okay. All right. So let's see. Anyway. Okay, so back to my worksheet. So I have mapped out then a coordinate system. So I'm thinking of it like I feel like modern musicians are basically visualizing this way anyways. They're basically saying, you know, I'm like on a fretboard, and I think it's the same with any instrument that has enough data in it that it's complex. You're gonna visualize it when you transpose as though everything is shifting. In other words, like if I'm a guitarist, I'm probably seeing like this as this middle point at 4 o'clock, meaning collection of notes around the key of C. That means my position, you might call it position 1, or the Ionian G-shaped position, or I would just call it the nodal point 6 or Aeolian position, because that's where it starts. You're going to say, well, that's position 1, and then you're kind of mapping everything else around it. And then if I say, well, we're at the collection of notes at, you know, D major, right? Then you're going to say, oh, I know what that means. That means that like position 1, then if I reallocate this whole thing is at the 7th fret, right? Or the Aeolian position 7th fret, or you might call it from the cage system an Ionian G shape is in essence on the 7th fret, right? So I think that's what people are doing, and then I mean that's what you'd have to do to visualize mapping out the fretboard. You have to do that in some way, and I think a lot of people are using the cage system, and then or some other system, 3-note per string, whatever. But they're finding a way to see the shapes as they rotate through the 12 collections of notes. The problem is that when you change the tonic, then it changes the modal center, so people get confused thinking that there's like 84 collections of notes. And I think when they think of rotating, they're basically just we end up memorizing like which collections are most important, right? Like in a guitar, it's useful to have the G, major collection, and A collection notes around the key of C. Why? Because we utilize the open strings. So we kind of say, okay, I know how to play with those, and I'll kind of capo off the rest of them or something like that, which is fine. But you can. It would be a lot. You'd grasp that transposition process a lot faster if we thought of it as basically we're building off of 12 collections of 7 notes, right? That would be more that if you thought about it that way, then you would be able to code switch between the collections of notes all 12 collections of notes much more quickly and be able to rotate between tonics and be able to know when you're on a particular note with relation to a particular collection. Do I build a major, minor, and what type of major, minor would be in or outside the collection? All of that would be way easier if you thought of it as a directional thing. So the first thing I mapped out here was not the first. So what I've done here is I've said, okay, it would be good not just to know the direction, like not just to know it from, like, it just appears, or even from left to right. So I'm imagining that the notes themselves are fixed. They're like string stars in space. They're the fixed points relative to the planet that's spinning under your string finger. And this planets have 7 notes and 5 oceans, which you can call Nashville numbers 1 through 7. I'm going to call them nodal point numbers since they corrupted the Nashville system and made it ordinal in some ways and messed it up. And then, or you can call it Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and so on and so forth. But if I change the collection, that G, for example, if I go a tick up from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, 2 ticks up, then now I'm still on G, but it's a Lydian. So what's happening is you've got 2 planes next to each other. You can think of them as 2 grids, and one grid is moving relative to the other grid. I think it's easiest to visualize as a planet, although it's actually more of a, what do you call it? A donut shape or whatever, but whatever. And so then, but it would be better, instead of just thinking of it going to the right, it can go left, right, up, down, which I think is the musical grid that people should be visualizing no matter what they're doing. Like musicians shouldn't be, singers shouldn't be visualizing the piano. That's why the do, re, mi lady came up with do, re, mi, because the piano doesn't help you to change the collections of notes unless you're playing the piano, because it's not symmetrical and the notes are symmetrical, right? That's the problem. So let's say we tick. So I could say I added these buttons, right? So now let's say that the collection is tied to this button, which is, so that orange is tied to that orange, and this modal tick is tied to this tick. So now I've added these buttons. Okay, so I'm not really concerned about the modes right now. I'm looking at and I'm going to call these ticks to the left and right. The 13 just means that that's going to be at 0, so I can add my button. So if that's 13, then this is 0. Okay, and then if I go up, so left, right represents up ticks and left is down. The up arrow represents a right tick and the down arrow represents a left tick, because they wouldn't let me do a left-right thing. Anyway, so then if I do this, then I can say, okay, it's ticking through as I move this to the right. What is moving to the right? The planet underneath the string stars moving to the right. So that means this is going to remain G, but underneath it, and by the way, if I change the modal center to 5 o'clock, now that's 0. So that's G at 0 on the distance. So this represents a modal half step, so which is a Mixolydian 0 note away. It's the tonic, and 0 represents the modal half steps. I'm going to call this flame color, and this is going to be just pink. So Mixolydian is pink, and 0 distance away is flame. Okay. So then if I go ticks to the right, now I'm in the ocean. So I'm in the ocean. It's still a G, but I'm in the ocean. It's not in the collection. If I go a tick to the right, now it's still a G, and I can see it moving to the right, but now it's a Lydian, which is a 4, which is, I'm going to call it absolute color blue relative to the collection, and it's 10 notes away from the Mixolydian, right? It's 10 notes away from the Mixolydian. Mixolydian's right above it, 5-10 notes away from the Mixolydian, and that's punch color. And punch doesn't, by the way, punch represents, now distance-wise, doesn't represent 10 notes away. It represents Lydian's 6th modal half step. Lydian's sixth modal half step is a short sixth modal half step, which is like a minor 7. Okay, that's what the punch stands for. I'm going to get into that later. And so I go up. So now it's a G, but it's a Phrygian, right? So it's moving to the right. And down below, I've got a 9 note away from the Mixolydian, which is a grape color. And grape is Phrygian's. Grape represents a long 5th modal half step. So this is Phrygian's long 5th modal half step would get you to grape, because I'm not measuring from G. I'm still have it at Mixolydian. The tonic is still Mixolydian, which in this case is A sharp or B flat in this collection. All right, and then if I go up, I'm in the ocean, and then if I go up, I'm in G. G is now the Dorian again. So now I'm G is now the Dorian. Okay, and then I go up, and so now I can see it rotating to the right, right? So that's pretty cool. So I can just keep rotating it, and so I'm not like typing in the number, it just rotates to the right. Okay, could it rotate to the left? We can't. Here it's rotating to the left. Let's start it back at 13. I'm going to bring this back to 13 starting point, and now I'm going to rotate it to the left. So left is down arrow. So left is down arrow. So the same thing could happen going to the left. So now I'm just shifting everything to the left. So now the G is the Aeolian, and now 2 ticks to the left, the G is the Locrian, which is the collection of notes around 12 o'clock from the perspective of the Ionian. In other words, the Ionian's on note 12, which is G sharp or A flat, right? And I go boom, and now G is the Ionian, meaning collection of notes at 11 o'clock, which is, if A is 1, 11 is G. And now G is the Dorian, see? So I should be able to shift. That's what you want to do in your mind, right? I want to be able to shift in my mind both directions. That's not all. That's not all, because there's a uniform direction going up and down. Because if I go down, if I shift the whole thing, if I shift everything behind it down, G is still G, but it's going to be a Dorian G, right? And that distance is a perfect fourth, or in other words, it's 5 notes away distance. It's a short fourth modal half step, which is a perfect fourth. And if I shift it up, it's 12 minus 4, or perfect fifth distance, 7 notes away, which is a long 4th modal half step. So this is probably something that I think a lot of guitarists aren't probably doing, and bass players in any string instrument, that has layered stuff, or even pianists who have multiple stacks of piano like an organ. I can see it moving up this way, right? I'm not sure if that works on a pianist, but so let's say I move it, let's say I move this up, then that one, the Ionian, is going to move up this way. Now that it's still going to be a G, it's going to be an Ionian. Now you could say, well, that's the same thing as moving this back 5 ticks, and it's the same thing as moving this forward 7 ticks. It is, if you don't take into account octaves. We're not talking octaves, we're just talking pitches, right? So I'm just visualizing the pitches. If I tick it up, that's equivalent to 7 ticks to 5 ticks to the left, or 7 ticks to the right, because it's all symmetrical. We have a grid that is measuring half steps on the x-axis and then mapping out the equation whole, half, whole, half from the perspective of the Ionian. And then on the y-axis, circle of fourths or fifths, except that there's a kink in the tuning down here, which I'm calling the fault line. Everything shifts up. If you go from tectonic plate here to tectonic plate here, it's going to shift to the right, right? So as long as we deal with that shift, that's what we have. So, right? So then if I tick this up, so now it's the Ionian G, right? So now the reason that's useful is because now I'm trying to visualize it from all directions, which I feel like it seems obvious that if you were to be able to do that, then your dexterity of being able to change your frame of reference, kind of like a video game, and be able to change collections of notes would be massively better than someone who's not practicing like visualizing it this way, right? Because now I can move it up and down. That's too far, right? I can move it down, and then 13, there's our starting point, and then move it down, right? And that changes changes the collection, and you can see now it went too far. Now it can't go over that number. Something still seems a little funny. I feel like I should, but anyway, that's so let's bring it back to 13. Okay, let's see what chat thinks about that. If I didn't talk too long. I'm not saying, by the way, I could visualize that perfectly. I haven't been doing this since I'm 4. But if you taught a 4-year-old like to visualize it like that on a guitar, and they did it for like 30 years, you know, I'm thinking that their ability to maneuver in ways that are just like way different, like way more advanced than currently the way people are thinking is quite likely. That's what I feel. I mean, it seems like I mean, I don't know. All right, that was I ranted too long for it to catch that. Well, maybe not. It's still thinking. Whatever. Let's see what it does. I'll noodle around for a while. Need a break. Thinking break. Yeah, I'll let it keep thinking on that. I don't think it's gonna recover. That was too much. That's too heavy, man. It's too heavy even for the AI. I can't hang with my mind on that. Thinks I'm crazy. Okay. So let's see. So then I could do the same thing with the distance notation for the modal point. So now I have distance notation up top, and then I have modal distance down below. So in other words, if I'm at a G mixolydian, then this changing the mode or tonic doesn't change anything when I look at it by point, whether it be by point from the stars unchanging, such as G, or by the points relative to those stars, like 7 continents, 5 oceans, which in this case represents the Nashville numbers or the Mixolydian. They wouldn't change unless you were using an ordinal system scale degrees. That's the fundamental problem. And so then down here I have a measurement system that's measuring from the Mixolydian. So x0 is representing how much distance there is from continent to continent. And then the first 0 represents half steps distance, and the t represents is it long, short, or the tonic. This is the tonic, and the other are long, short. In other words, if you go each scale degree, instead of having major, minor, perfect, augmented, and diminished, all the scale degrees are off by 1. So a 7th would really be a 6th if you measured from the point. And there's really only 2 distances, either long or short, not 5. So the long or short just represents, is it a long or short distance? Meaning if it was a 7th scale degree, it would be 6 modal half steps away, and it would have a half step distance, including continents and oceans, of 10 notes. If it was long, 11 notes away. If it was short, 10 notes away. Right? It's either short or long. In that case, 11 or 10 notes away. That's how the map works. Why? Because that's just the frickin' map. If you apply out the whole half formula. Okay, so then like so I've added a rotation here. So how did this go? So then if I change the modal center, you can imagine I'm building a chord, right? Like if I built a bar chord off of this G, then what kind of chord would I build? It would be a major chord because I'm building off of the Mixolydian. So if I'm looking at Nashville number, it'd be a 5 chord. I'm building off the Mixolydian. Even if the 5 is the tonic, in this case it is the tonic, right? So the 5 chord doesn't mean exactly the same thing from a voice leading perspective, but it does mean that I can build a chord diatonically by building not really just a major chord, but a Mixolydian chord would be more specific because it has a flat 7 from the normal naming convention, meaning a 10 note away distance instead of an 11 note away distance there. Okay, so what if if I change the tonic, one way I can think about that is moving up through the collection to think about how to build a chord from it. In other words, if I build a chord like from this one, see, I'd build, let me try this. If I had, here's my tonic in green, and then I'm gonna copy that, put that down here, and then I'm gonna link those, right click and group those. So if I had my tonic in green, right, there would be my 3rd, and then here's like a 5th out here, right? So I could build my chord off of that. Or I can build a bar chord, right? Here's my there's my 5th. Here's my 5th, and then my 3rd is going to be 5, 6, 7 down here, right? Bar chord. So then it's like, okay, well, what if I want to build something off of the Aeolian? Well, I'm not going to make that the 1, but I am going to measure from it. So I could make that like my temporary, tonic, right? So I can change my measuring system down here, not the points up top, right? So how would I do that? Well, I could go I can change my mode up. Wait a sec. I could change my mode. I need to go to, I'm going to the right, because where am I? So I'm still kind of trying to, this is kind of heavy. It's does kind of turn your mind around in circles. So I'm going from 5 to 6. I'm going to the right. Let's see if I go, my ticks to the right is up. Would be here. Yeah. Okay, so now, see, now this whole thing is moving this way, right? So I'm going to grab this, and now that moves it up to Aeolian. because Aeolian is now the 0 note away from A, stands for Aeolian, 0, which is the tonic. So now I didn't change the point to 1. It's still 6, but I am saying if I measure from that point, then that's going to be the point 0 that I can measure from. I'm measuring from the Aeolian, right? I measure it from Nashville number 6. It's point 0, and I'm measuring from there. And now if I want to be in the collection, because that's Aeolian is a minor chord, then that would look, the third would be out here. So we're going to say 6, 7, 6, 7, 1. All right. What did I do here? It'd be here, right? Boom. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, yeah. So that's a bar chord for the A. Okay, that makes sense. And then if I tick this to the right again, so now I'm going to move up to the Locrian. So again, it's not going to change up top, but this is going to change to here. The Locrian is going to be the tonic. So then I move up one tick to the Locrian. So now, oh, wait a sec. This should still be 13. And then Locrian. Right, I moved up a tick to the Locrian. So now I'm going to move up. This one needs to move up one tick to the Locrian. Yeah, okay. So then I grab this, move it up to the Locrian. So now that's 0. And if I was going to make a Locrian chord, it has a flat 5, diminished chord or half diminished or whatever. So it would be there, right? So again, it's still nodal point 7. It's not nodal point 1 of the Locrian scale. But if I measure from nodal point 7, then I have standard distance notation. I don't need to make that the 1. In other words, to think about the distance from the 7th nodal point in the 12, in the 7 note collection, right? Okay. So then if I go up again, I'm going to move to Ionian, right? So now my thing moves up to Ionian. Boom. And the Ionian is going to be a major because it's the 1 type chord. So it has a normal 5th modal half step. By the way, it's 4 modal half steps away, which is the 5th scale degree. 5th is off by 1. And then it has the 3rd out here again. Or the 3rd is out here again. Wait a second. Okay, yeah, 2nd modal half step, 3rd scale. Okay. Whew. All right. My head is kind of going here. Let me see what I'm going to copy this into chat, see what chat says about this. This was my last conversation, not this one. It's finally thought through I had such deep thoughts. It took it a while, due to the profundity, but that's okay. Chat needs to catch up. Elon needs to put some databases in space or something, because it needs to have more memory to keep up with my mind. All right.
Yes. I think I understand what the worksheet is doing now, and I think the 2-grid moving planet idea is a significant step, because you're no longer merely making a prettier fretboard diagram. You're building a way to practice changing reference frames while keeping the physical pitch fixed. Your G example makes that especially clear. G is the string star. It does not move. What you're moving is the 7-continent, 5-ocean collection underneath it. As you tick the underlying collection left or right, G successively occupies different modal nodes or an out-of-collection ocean. Then you're adding a second axis that lets you perform an equivalent chromatic displacement through the fourth-fifth relationship, OZAs, to what I would want somebody to be able to do mentally if the goal is fretboard fluency. The really important thing you've built is reference frame dexterity. Think about a video game map. A weak player knows, open quote, I memorized the route from this spawn point to this building, close quote. A strong player knows the territory sufficiently well that you can spawn somewhere else. Rotate the camera, approach from the opposite direction, change floors, turn around, and still know exactly where everything is. That's the distinction I see in what you're building. You don't merely want somebody to memorize. Open quote, here's my C major shape. Close quote. You want them to be able to mentally grab the underlying musical grid and go, while the physical fretboard remains underneath their fingers. That's a substantially richer mental operation. And the horizontal movement is beautifully clean. You've essentially got two layers, string star layer, fixed physical pitch location, planet layer, rotating collection structure. So hold G constant. At one collection position, G might be, open quote, Mixolydian, close quote. Tick the planet, open quote, ocean, close quote. Tick again, open quote, Lydian, close quote. Tick again, open quote, Phrygian, close quote, etc. The brilliant pedagogical thing here is that you aren't telling the student, open quote, okay, forget what G was 5 seconds ago. We're in another scale now, close quote. You're showing, open quote, G hasn't done anything. Look what moved underneath G. Close quote. That makes the distinction between pitch identity and collection membership function visually explicit. And your colors give you yet another independent encoding. Pitch equals fixed star node equals absolute modal color, distance from tonic equals distance color. That's exactly the separation of variables principle we were just discussing. Then your vertical dimension adds something I like even more, because now you're teaching the learner that the apparently different fretboard directions are manifestations of the same 12-position chromatic geometry. Your horizontal axis advances by chromatic ticks. Your vertical axis exploits the string relationship. One direction equals 5 semitones, opposite direction equals 7 semitones, mod 12, and -5, mod 12. So the student's eventually supposed to see, open quote, one string equals 5 ticks equals 7 ticks, close quote, when octave register isn't being tracked. That's powerful. Because those aren't 3 unrelated guitar rules anymore. They're 3 visual routes through the same pitch class space. That's exactly the kind of compression we're talking about. And your fault line is actually useful. The guitar's tuning irregularity between G and B is usually taught as an annoying exception. Open quote. Everything works like this, except here. Close quote. Your tectonic plate metaphor turns the exception into a geographic feature of the map. Most of the grid has one translation rule. Then there's a fault line. Cross it, open quote, shift one chromatic position. Close quote. Now the student doesn't need 20 different shape exceptions caused by the tuning discontinuity. Ideally, he learned fault line transformation and derives the consequences. That's another thing we can measure in the bloat project. Open quote. How many apparently separate guitar exceptions collapse into one underlying tuning discontinuity? Close quote. I suspect that's going to be a productive category. There's one distinction I'd preserve carefully. You said something like the notes are the stars and the planet is rotating underneath the finger. I think that's excellent for the mental animation, but I'd formalize the model as 2 coordinate planes, just as you also described it. Because then we can say precisely what's invariant. Plane A, physical tap pitch plane, string, fret, pitch class. Plane B, collection function plane, collection, modal node, tonic, modal distance, in collection, ocean status. The controls translate plane B relative to plane A. That's mathematically cleaner than saying the pitches themselves move. And the planet-star visualization is then the teaching metaphor for the transformation. Here's where I think this becomes more than a notation system. You're basically constructing a fretboard simulator for the mind. That's why I think the buttons are important. You're not merely using Excel to calculate an answer. You're repeatedly performing the transformation. Open quote, right, left, up, down, change tonic, right, up, close quote, dot, and watching the relationships update. Eventually, you want to remove Excel and still be able to run the animation mentally.
Right.
That's exactly how a training tool ought to work.
Exactly.
The worksheet is the scaffold.
That's
The
what I'm
mental
talking about.
animation is the skill. And yes, I'd expect someone who has internalized that operation to have an advantage at exactly the task being practiced.
Right.
Rapidly reorienting a known pitch
That's what
fretboard map
I'm
across
talking about.
collections and tonic
Wouldn't
references.
that be useful?
The quantitative question is how large that advantage becomes and how quickly it develops. Not whether practicing reference frame transformations gives you more practice at reference frame transformations. Hash. And I see another really interesting consequence. Once you've internalized the 2D grid, transposition stops looking like learning another thing. That's huge. Instead of, open quote C major, learn it. D major, learn another thing. Ef major, another thing. A Dorian, another thing. Close quote, open quote. Here's the object. Move it, close quote. Then tonic becomes another independent control. Open quote. Here's home. Move it. Close quote. So you've potentially reduced an enormous combinatorial looking problem to transformations of a comparatively small invariant object. That's exactly the kind of thing we should look for throughout this project. 84 looking things, 12 collections, 1 7-position home variable, and then perhaps even 12 collections, 1 collection geometry, times 12 translations.
Okay.
Now we're getting somewhere really interesting because the ultimate compression may be even greater than 12 instead of 84.
Yeah.
You potentially teach 1 7-continent 5-ocean geometry,
Exactly.
12 translations of that geometry,
Uh-huh.
7 possible home positions, and
Right.
a small number of fretboard transformation rules.
Yes.
Everything else is composition.
Correct.
That's the direction I'd keep pushing the worksheet. How few invariant objects and transformation rules can generate everything that the legacy system teaches as separate named cases? Because that is where we're going to be able to put an actual number on the bloat.
That's right.
Memsite.
Okay. So anyway, I had another thing that I was looking at here. And I was like, okay, so now I have my distance terminology. And so I was working on my colors now. So I'm going to say, like, what if we were measuring from the Phrygian, you know? And so let's work, like, how many different ways can I name this distance? So I'm at 4 o'clock, E, from the stars, but I'm going to label it by the relative position, Nashville number 3. The P stands for Phrygian. So if I go from this node in the system to this node, then that's going to be what I'm going to call modal half steps away, which would be the second scale degree if I renumbered this to be the 1. But I don't need to renumber it to be the 1. I could just say, no, that's the point of 0. That's the point that I'm measuring from. It's still 3, nodal point 3, Nashville number 3, but I'm measuring from it. Therefore, relative position to measuring it is 0. I can measure then in modal half steps, which means that this would be 1 modal half step away, which would be a short Phrygian. Why? Because if you go 1 modal half step away, the distances could either be 2 or 1 half steps, note half steps. So 1 modal half step away could either be 2 note half steps, which is more common, or 1 note half step. So and then the 1 stands for half step distance. So I could say that then this movement is a Phrygian first modal half step, which is a short modal half step, which converts to a scale degree of the second scale degree or minor second, right? I could say that it's Nashville number 3's first modal half step, which lands me on Nashville number 4. I could say using a color system, I use an absolute color system. This is light blue and this is dark blue, and the distance has a different color system, and it is not a 12-note color system now. I'm using only a 7 color system because it's based on distance, right? So if it's 0 notes away, we're gonna call it flame. If it's 1 modal half step, not notes away, it's 0 modal half steps away, it's flame. 1 modal half step away, whether that modal half step be a long or short, it's going to be chartreuse. And then if it's 2 modal half steps away, whether long or short, it's going to be mint. And if it's 3 modal half steps away, whether long or short, it's going to be sky. I'm just going to call that sky now. These are more fancy names than just up top where you just have light blue, blue, pink, red, yellow, yellow, green, and green. See down here you have sky. And then if it's 4 modal half steps away, whether it be a long or short 4 modal half step distance, it's going to be azure as opposed to blue, right? And then if it's 8 modal half steps away, whether it be long or short 8 modal half steps, it's going to be orchid. We're going to call that orchid. And then if it's is that what I called that, or is that purple? Orchid. That's clearly orchid. Okay. And then if it's 6 modal half steps away, whether long or short, it's going to be punch color. And that punch color is pretty similar to the flame color, but they're different. So they're going to be connected. That's the leading tone. So maybe that's kind of good to a way. I don't know if you get used to it. So, okay. So if I map this thing out, I can say then from a color system that light blue chartreuse lands on blue, right? Because light blue is Phrygian, and I'm going a chartreuse distance, which is a first modal half step, lands on blue. And because the light blue is Phrygian, then the first modal half step chartreuse color stands for a short first modal half step, meaning it's 1 note half step away to land on blue, which is Lydian. If I go here, then I'm measuring the distance, goes boom, this is the triangle, boom, boom, boom. This is just the starting point, which is 0. So I'm going to go, I'm going to say this is going to be Phrygian's second, that's a Phrygian second, modal half step lands on Mixolydian. And Phrygian's second modal half step, that's in the middle, is a short, that's what the S stands for, modal half step, meaning that it's only 3 notes away instead of 4 notes away if it was long. And if we convert the second to scale degrees, it would be the 3rd scale degree. Short is usually minor, so it would be a minor 3rd. If I use the color system, it would be light blues, mint lands on pink. Light blues, mint lands on pink because light blue is Phrygian. Mint represents the second modal half step, whether long or short, but because it's light blues mint, it's short, meaning it's 3 notes away instead of 4 notes away. A minor 3rd lands me on pink, which is Mixolydian. Makes perfect sense, right? So that's the color system. So then I have light blues, sky blue lands on red. So that's because light blue is Phrygian. Light blues, sky blue. Sky blue represents the 3rd modal half step. And because it's light blues, sky blue, or 3rd modal half step, it's a short 3rd modal half step, which if I convert to the standard system is off by 1, it would be the 4th scale degree. And the short distance is actually the perfect distance, a perfect 4th. And it's 5 notes away, and which lands you on red, which is Aeolian. And then here we have light blues, azure. I think I'm saying that right. That's the blue. Azure, light blues, azure lands on yellow. So light blue is Phrygian. Phrygian's azure, which stands for 4 modal half step, which if it's the light blue or Phrygian's 4th modal half step is a long 4th modal half step, meaning it's 7 notes away. So the Phrygian's 4th modal half step is a long 4th modal half step. If I convert that to scale degrees, the 4 is a 5. It would be a 5th, and the long 5th is a perfect 5th. And that lands me on yellow, which is Locrian. And then here we say that light blues orchid lands me on yellow-green. So light blues Phrygian. So light blues orchid. Orchid stands for a 5th modal half step, whether long or short. But because it's light blues orchid, then it's Phrygian's 5th modal half step, which is a short fifth modal half step, or sixth scale degree, which means it's only 8 notes away instead of 9 notes away. Okay. And then so I'm just gonna I'm trying to just map this out in my mind, right? So then I say the next one would be light blues punch lands on green. So light blues Phrygians punch stands for a 6th modal half step or 7th scale degree if I convert it. And because it's Phrygians 6th modal half step or 7th scale degree, it's a short 6th modal half step or 7th scale degree, meaning it's only 10 notes away instead of 11 notes away. Okay, and then that gets me back to a full distance. I've gone up an octave, so light blues flame lands on light blue, meaning I went an octave, or I stayed still, because I'm not taking into account octave kind of distance as we go around like a circle notation here. So, is that useful? I feel like it's interesting. I feel like it's interesting. I think it anyway, let's try a joke. Let's try a joke break. Let's try wrap this thing up. Okay. People think rock and roll is easy. People just think rock and roll is freaking easy, man. That's because experts like me make it look easy, but like it's not, you know? Because rock and roll is hard. Rock and roll is hard. Why? Because you're multitasking, you know? You're rocking and rolling. And so now I've been doing this for so long. So with enough practice, you can get pretty good at multitasking, despite what people say. So I can, for example, I can rock, roll, and chew gum at the same time. That's right. Rock, roll, chew gum, 3 things, same time. Most people can rock. Most people can roll. Very few can integrate the departments. That's the problem. That's why they call us rock stars. Nobody ever becomes famous for just rolling. I mean, come on. I started out just rocking. It took me 6 months before they let me roll. I mean, and that's right, the way to learn. You know, you don't want to roll before you rock. That's how people get hurt. So you see these young musicians today, they want everything immediately. 2 weeks of lessons and they're already trying to roll. So slow down, learn to rock, get your fundamentals. Then you can introduce the roll, you know. Eventually I became ambidextrous. I can rock with my left and roll with my right. That's advanced right there. And now, like I said, I can rock, roll, and chew gum at the same time. That's professional level. Like Keith Richards has nothing on that. I'm chewing Trident. But people ask, can you walk and chew gum at the same time? Please, walking is amateur hour for multitasking. I could rock, roll, and chew gum at the same. Sometimes I don't even chew the gum. I chew it recreationally anymore. It's part of my training regiment. Sometimes I'll chew gum without rocking or rolling just to isolate the muscle group. So you don't want to overtrain the rock and neglect the chew. That's how you develop imbalances. Monday I rock, Tuesday I roll, Wednesday I gum, Thursday I put it all together, Friday, recovery day. That's how you become a professional. Some musicians only rock, and that's fine. I'm not judging. Not everyone can handle the role. There are entire genres built around people who got halfway through the training red program. Classical musicians don't have this problem. They sit down. Jazz musicians are different. They'll rock, but they won't tell you like when they're going to roll. That's improvisation, I guess. You know, country music tend to roll pretty well, but usually something happens to the truck. So punk music just rocks immediately. No warm up, no stretching. That's why the songs are 2 minutes long. But if you really want to be a rock star, you got to master the whole discipline. Rock, roll, chew. And don't try to skip steps.
You crawl before you walk before you rock before you roll, and you roll before you introduce the gum. Otherwise, you end up with gum all knotted up in the strings somehow. Then you have to cut off the strings, and it's no good. I'm gonna turn on. I'll turn on the thing and see what it says. I'll have one more song.
The morning broke with calm and golden light as heaven smiled upon the valiant knight. The cave lay silent, darkness overthrown. The path before them seemed at last their own. They journeyed on through valleys fresh and fair, with songs of birds that filled the peaceful air. The lady smiled, her fears at last at rest, while hope once more awakened in each breast. Yet hidden eyes observed them from afar. An aged hermit stooped beneath the years, appeared with humble voice and gentle tears. His silver beard flowed softly to his waist. His quiet words were filled with seeming grace. My children, said the holy man with care, the night approaches, danger fills the air. My little cell is poor.
All right. Let's see what we got. See what it gives us.
Looks easy. Anyone can do that.
No big deal.
That's because experts like me make it look easy. Rock and roll is hard. Why? Because you're multitasking. You're rocking and you're rolling. Yeah! Now, I've been doing this a long time. So with enough practice, you can get pretty good at multitasking, despite what people say. I can rock, roll, and chew gum at the same time. That's right, rock, roll, chew gum, 3 things. Roll. Chew gum. Most people can rock. Most people can roll. Very few can integrate the departments. Yeah, let's rock. Let's roll. Rock and roll together. That's why they call us rock stars. Rock stars, yeah. Nobody ever became famous for just rolling. Legends rock, whoa. Legends don't just roll. They rock.
I started out just rocking.
Foundation first, no shortcuts.
Took me 6 months before they let me roll.
Earn it through discipline. Approved, you may roll.
Yeah!
And that's the right way to learn. You don't want to roll before you can rock.
Whoa, ouch!
That's how people get hurt. Master the foundation first. You see these young musicians today, they want everything immediately. 2 weeks of lessons and they're already trying to roll.
Let's roll! Wow!
Patience today. Slow down, learn to rock, get your fundamentals.
Okay, I'm slowing down.
First, posture and balance.
Stand firm, like this?
Good. Eventually, I became ambidextrous. I can rock with the left and roll with the right. That's advanced. And now, like I said, I can rock, roll, and chew gum at the same time. That's professional. Keith Richards has nothing on me. I'm chewing Trident. This gum is superior. Strong teeth, stronger. People ask, can you walk and chew gum at the same time? Please, walking is amateur hour. I can rock, roll, and chew gum at the same time. That's it, power and precision. Sometimes I don't even chew the gum recreationally anymore.
Focus on your breathing and balance.
Sometimes I'll chew gum without rocking or rolling, just to isolate the muscle group. It's all about pure jaw work, no distractions. Excellent form, keep that focus. You don't want to overtrain the rock and neglect the chew. That's how you develop imbalances. Look at this guy. Overtrained rock, neglected chew. Imbalances lead to poor performance, fatigue, jaw strain. Balance training is... Monday, I rock. Tuesday, I roll. Wednesday is gum. Thursday, I put it all together. Friday is recovery. Discipline today. Legend every day. That's how you become a professional. Some musicians only rock, and that's fine. I'm not judging. Not everybody can. There are entire genres built around people who got halfway through the training program. We stopped at rock. All power, no balance. Rock, power and rhythm. Roll, balance and control. Choose. Jazz musicians are different. They'll rock, but they won't tell you when they're going to roll. That's improvisation. When is the roll happening? In jazz, the best plans leave room for surprise. We see them rolling through life. Something happens every single time. Not again, hold on. Whoa, the engine's smoking. I told you, the truck. She's giving out, we're stopping. Well, that figures. Guess we'll roll with it. No warm up, no stretching, we just rock, yeah, rock, yeah. 2 minutes of glory, then we collapse. Play fast, rock hard, don't last. That's the point, total exhaustion. But if you really want to be a rock star, you've got to And don't try to skip steps. You crawl before you walk before you rock before you roll, and you roll before you introduce gum. Otherwise, you end up with gum all knotted up in the string somehow, and you'll have cut them.
Okay. At least I don't know about the script. The animation was good.